Hi, Dr. David. It's so great to be with you tonight.
Hey, Tammy, it's so great to have you as my co-pilot today.
So, what's the topic for tonight?
Well, in light of the 4th of July holiday, I thought we would do freedom and
Oh,
recovery.
great. Yes, I love that topic. So,
Yeah.
please share.
Yeah. So I think everybody knows me, but I do want to plug my book anyway. This is it, Lust, Men, and Meth, the book, the go-to book on chemsex. And of course, that's one of the programs we work with at Seeking Integrity as well. So that's a big deal. But I was trying to think of something appropriate for the 4th of July, and I thought, my God, my whole life in recovery has been about freedom, freedom from so much. And I thought it was just kind of a useful time. I usually kind of go over skills and that kind of thing, but tonight's more of a reflection. And I think then hopefully people will jump in and share their own experience. But I just started listening to things that freedom and recovery meant for me. And, they started spilling out one hope, possibility, freedom from all kinds of things, from no longer needing to stay in the same cycle of sadness and despair and hopelessness. And I was caught in those cycles of just really being drawn down. And I don't know if it was on this webinar I mentioned it or not, but at the end, I was no longer a bar drinker. I drank at home. The only thing I had in my life was work. I was desperately afraid to lose that. That was the whole income thing. But I had nobody. And I'd go home and drink and black out and start the next day. But I was in such despair and hopelessness in this kind of my world got small. And I often, for about a year, I didn't change this tells you how long ago it was. I didn't change the record on the record player. And it was Joni Mitchell, who I love, but it was so sad. And I would play the same sad music over and over because I didn't have the energy to change the record, even to flip it over. So that cycle of despair and sadness and even confusion, I didn't know what to do. I thought if I would, go and get a cat or go to grad school or quit smoking or all these other things except the real problem. So caught in these kind of lies to myself. And so it's freedom from that. It's freedom from misleading myself. It means that I have the freedom to have real sustainable joy. And I think that joy was something that I didn't have at all. I didn't really know what that was until I got probably well into recovery. But right now, I could choose not to be joyous, but it's a choice. And I have the freedom to choose right now. And I'm not automatically depressed or suicidal or brought down to really low points. So I've found, I can have joy and I rediscovered things in recovery: music, art, things I like to do, nature, connection. One of the things I mentioned, I was really just a bar drinker for a while then at home. And the idea when I came into program of the connection, the people, that brought me to life again. So that was also a freedom to choose life in a way, to choose to be connected, meaning and purpose. I had my life was kind of adrift before, and I had the freedom to kind of find what is it that I want to do with my life. And it actually led me to this. This is not my first career. I became a therapist in recovery, and it really so I kind of discovered this whole purpose of being with that freedom. And I could just go on, and no longer being trapped as a victim, freedom to get beyond my limited belief systems where things were like black and white or always catastrophic or always overgeneralizing. We've talked before in this webinar about the negativity bias we get, which is a thing in our brain where we start to just only see the bad stuff that's happening, and we become actually blind to the good stuff. And I had to kind of retrain my brain how to see good things. I did that with gratitude lists and other kinds of stuff. But that freedom to let's just be, to break out of that little narrow worldview that's like things are always going to be bad, or I'm never good enough, or whatever that crap was that was swimming around in my head. And then finally, I think most important, I had the freedom not to be defined by my past. And that could be trauma. It could be my addiction. It could be the mistakes I made, but I didn't have to be that person. I didn't have to continue living that story. And I could rewrite my story, rewrite the ending, at least, of the story. And that was probably the most impactful freedom of all, was that ability to say, okay, I had that stuff happen. I have done these things. I've done those things. But if I live a life of integrity and recovery, I can really rewrite that and escape that. And uh, so it's so interesting to me because this whole freedom idea, I hadn't really thought of it going to this holiday. And once I started just doing that, I realized, my God, my recovery is all about freedom. It's all about gaining back so much. And I think that's, and not that I can't fall into any one of those traps and do, I get overwhelmed or feel everything's catastrophic or never quite as bad as it used to be. I do change records now. We don't have records. So I listen, I play digital music and I do change, I shuffle.
There you go.
So anyway, it's just, life is so much better. And I have the freedom to choose it. And I think it's, what a gift. And I was so blind when I got in recovery. I had no idea what I was even choosing. I just wanted the misery to stop. And boy, what a choice. So I think that's all I have. What we do, love to hear from you, Tammy. And then we throw it open. And if you people would like to talk about that topic or anything else, we kind of go where people would like to go.
I love that. And yes, and he'll answer any kind of questions as well. So don't limit it just to freedom. But, I was thinking, I was just telling someone who's considering coming to the Seeking Integrity Los Angeles program. I had this remembrance of being terrified when I was going, I like to say when I was being hauled off to treatment. But I remember being terrified, both that it wouldn't work and that it would work, because if it didn't work, what do I have? And if it did work, how would I ever live without my addiction? And so getting the tools to be able to live a life free of the addiction and to live a good life. I love what you're talking about with joy. And I define joy different than happiness. I feel like happiness is fleeting. I'm happy, that whatever, I'm happy something happened or whatever, I'm making dinner that doesn't hardly ever happen. I'll be happy if I don't burn it. Great. But joy is this, more overarching presence in my life. And I can have joy even when things aren't going my way. So even when my circumstances aren't making me happy, I still have this platform and foundation of joy. And I only have that because of recovery. I was, and I think when people think about, being scared to get into recovery because they're afraid of losing their freedom to use their addiction, and they don't have the perspective of how trapped they are by the addiction. Yes. I was so trapped. Like you were talking about, like your world got small. You're only drinking at home. You're only playing one sad Joni Mitchell record, I'm like, but I thought that was a great analogy for the cycle that you're in. It's like, I've got one record. I've got one, I live in this.
Yes.
I do the drinking. It's very siloed, very small. And even I didn't have as much time. I drink everywhere. But I drank in the bar still. But even being in a bar, I'm still alone. They would, I pretended like they were my friends or whatever, but I wasn't connected truly to any of those people. That was not that wasn't like, like, David, I really care about you and I can tell you're a little sad today and I want to know more about it or whatever. It was just like party, and that very superficial, and, particularly if you're buying people drinks, then they're really your friends. But, that whole, or your whatever, but, that very superficial. And I knew it. I think deep down, I always knew that wasn't really a substantial relationship. That wasn't really what we were striving for. So, when you're talking about I was often trapped in the always and nevers. It's always going to be, or it's never going to be, like the
right
drama queen for sure. Whoa. And so to have people teach me that, everything is temporary. I mean, really, like even the happiness if I don't burn dinner, that's really temporary. It's, so I have to have that perspective on things. The really hard things, most of them, are temporary. Even if it's a chronic, there's still moments of the up and downs. But the joyful things, like, savor those, because that is fleeting as well. So having that perspective that it isn't always and never, and to learn to have gratitude even in the hard stuff, because
Right.
like often happens, when do I learn the most? When the rubber hits the road, when it gets hard, when things are kind of skating around and going my way, what is my tendency to, get a little less, I do a little bit less when things get hard, then I'm really paying attention to the tools because I need them. I really need them, badly in those moments. One of the things that I think the freedom, having the serenity, having my guts not churning, that was one of the huge freedoms for me, because I was constantly in a state of chaos. And so to learn to learn that isn't what I want, because I didn't know that, but to learn to be able to sort of settle down and to have that serenity and peace, even if there's chaos outside me, that was a huge freedom for me. And to be, like you said too, you talked about being, real with yourself, and I think learning to be our true selves and to have that be okay. That's enough, that we are enough with that. Huge. So,
Boy, you said so much. Right? I want to just, that comment just then, because my drinking, my addiction was all about not being able to accept who I was as a gay man. And it was all about that whole process. And boy, talk about finding your true self, and I really found that in the kind of gentle support of my recovery home. And it was beautiful. And so I think, that's all about this process of reintegrating ourselves. And for me, you remind me of something else, that idea of that ever-present joy. We can have a bad day, but it's the joy of not having to wake up and think, oh my God, what did I do? Or who did I tell what? Or weaving these crazy stories and trying to be accountable, and just all that is such a relief. But my God, I probably spent half my energy trying to manage all that craziness. And so, just to be free of that is amazing.
And the lies you were telling yourself, if you're like me, you were telling yourself the lies too. So, trying to spin
Most
the
of
story.
all.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Probably most of all. You're right.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but even as, a heterosexual female, like I didn't like myself. There was like everything I was doing was not in alignment with the values of who I wanted to be, but I didn't know how to do it differently. So I was, I was a hot mess, and it was painful to me, which, why you have to, I couldn't deal with the story of last night. So I'm going to go get annihilated again tonight, and
Exactly.
then I created another one. It was just the endless cycle of, it was painful. So, were there moments of fun in all of that? Yes, but they were early on and they were fleeting. And then, when I really dug down and figured it out, I wasn't having fun. I was still chasing the first fun.
Exactly. The fantasy of what was and what you hope to get again.
Yes, but it really didn't happen.
And the other thing too, toward the end of my addiction, my acting out, was that it started not to work. I couldn't get to where I wanted to go, and that terrified me even more. That I was in this mess of an addiction, and it wasn't even doing what I wanted it to do. And so everything was kind of falling apart, and just, God, to be relieved of all that. If you're just joining us, the topic tonight is freedom and recovery in light of the 4th of July. So,
and we have a comment. So it's thinking about drinking versus not drinking. I gained freedom from the foggy, drunk brain. So true. Towards the end, I was drinking 24/7, even though I didn't drink until after 9 p.m. Clear thinking is wonderful, and opening myself up to learning who I am all over again, and learning to be more mindful.
That's so insightful and beautiful. And I think that foggy brain that you talk about, occurs with all drugs. And it's a reminder that I think we really need to be gentle with ourselves early on, because we're not operating with all cylinders. And that fog took a long time for me to clear up. I know with my meth clients, it takes even longer sometimes to clear up. So I think it's important. One funny thing you say, even though I didn't drink until after 9 p.m., I, like all of us, I think, tried many different things to control my drinking, try to make it work. Became vegetarian, got a cat. But one of the things I did, I thought I have too much free time. I was working full time, so I need to go to graduate school. So I went to graduate school at night thinking I couldn't have time to drink. Well, guess what? I would come home after 9 or 10 and start drinking. So that's funny. That really reminds me of, we do anything, right?
I worked second shift. So I took a job working second shift so I wouldn't get out until later. And I would go catch up with my friends and outdo them so that by closing time, So yes, that, it was a lifestyle. But, where you're talking about with the foggy brain, that's not just with, alcohol and chemicals. I see that with any form of addiction, whether it's, gambling or sex addiction or porn addiction, you are checked out and you are not able to be your true self. Your brain is, I think, just as hijacked. It's not chemically induced, but your brain is still offline, regardless what type of addiction your particular behavior is.
And we know now that process addictions like sex addiction or gambling or even overeating do affect the brain in very concrete physiological ways, in much the way that substances do. And so, the brains are changing with porn. There's kind of dramatic changes that happen with porn. So, you're absolutely right, Tony, that the brain takes a long time to come back. I want to say one other thing that Abby said, and that's this, clear thing is wonderful, opening myself to learning who I am all over again and learning being mindful. So, and I don't know if I ever knew who I was to start with. So
that's what I was thinking too.
Learning all over again, but certainly learning and discovering who I am and what I like and what I don't like. And it's just the ability, again, the freedom to choose. And discover and explore and the freedom to be me. I think a lot of my drinking too was about trying to please other people or trying to be somebody I was not, and to really let all that go and just the freedom to just be who I am. Wow, what a concept.
And to not have to be it perfectly, that because I had that expectation that it was a fail if I didn't. My parents, I love them very much, but if I got an A- on my report card, it would be, why didn't you get an A? And that kind of like always having to strive for, and it would be it wasn't like, oh, I didn't do it quite good enough. It was a fail if I didn't, get it, exactly right. So
Right.
To learn to be far more far softer on myself, not to give myself a whole lot of wiggle room, because that's not helpful either, but to just know that I've got the 12-step program, so I have an opportunity to make amends when I need to, and I have tools to use to help guide me, but that I'm human. I'm not gonna do it perfectly. I'm gonna hurt other people, even if I don't want to. I will hurt people, but I can. That doesn't have to cause me to go act out.
Right, for sure.
So it says, interesting. I'm wondering if the foggy brain feels the same with process versus, say, alcohol. Any thoughts on that?
I would say it feels pretty darn similar. We know just from PET scans and fMRIs that the processes are very similar organically and the impact on the brain. But I think if you see someone, they used to say like sex addiction didn't have a detox, right? Well, it doesn't have maybe a physical detox like heroin, but it has an emotional detox. It's wrenching for people. And it consists of this fogginess we're talking about, and impulsivity and an inability to kind of settle, and fogginess. And one of the things we know from both process addictions like sex addiction and amphetamines is that they decrease what psychologists call verbal memory, which is our ability to do abstract thinking. And so people are muddled. People have a hard time reading a book. People have a hard time. As a therapist, we do this standard cognitive behavioral therapy. You can't really do that with someone in early recovery from chemsex or sex addiction, because their brains just aren't operating at full tilt yet. So I think it feels very similar. Long story short.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I have seen that because I know a lot of people, particularly partners. So here's a typical scenario. Partners will say, I gave my husband Out of the Doghouse or Sex Addiction 101, and he's having trouble reading it, or he's had to read it 3 to 5 times. And I go, yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me, because absorbing that information would be challenging. I think that's like with the big book where the big book of the 12 steps, so like AA. So they'll say, keep rereading it and you'll see new things all the time. And I think that that's really true, that as you are able to get into things deeper, you will start seeing things. And I think you're in a different place too. So I think that adds to it. But so for me, food was another one of my addictions. And I remember I remember thinking, I can numb out with this just like I did with drinking.
Wow.
Now the only difference was I didn't have blackouts with food addiction, so there was a little bit difference in the brain chemistry from that standpoint. But I remember it gave me the same, disconnect, I don't have to feel anything. So. Right.
And too, as we're learning about the brain with addiction, all addictions, both chemical and process addictions, if you think of the big major connections in our brains as like interstate highways, right? We have an interstate highway going from the emotional part of our brain where addiction lives to our frontal cortex, which is our thinking part, the smarter part, the one that says, no, that's not such a good idea. It prevents us from jumping into impulsive decisions. It kind of protects us. And literally, that superhighway is like chopped off. The neural connections between that old part of our brain that drives addiction and the part of our brain that could protect us is kind of cut off. And so we're not thinking clearly. And that takes time to reconnect all the parts of our brain, for sure.
Oh, that's interesting. So Kim Buck on one of her webinars was talking about that addiction is down in I think she called it the lizard part of her brain or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, so the old part, like you're talking about, and she said, like breathing. And I thought, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense because, I feel like, if you're in active addiction, you are protecting your ability to act out with your addiction, just like you protect your right to breathe, and she said it doesn't get to the executive part. Now I just thought it stayed here, but I hadn't thought about it being like the road being cut off, so that it couldn't get there.
Yeah, no, that's the strands connecting are really weakened a lot. Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting thing. We're learning more and more all the time. But
and there's so much more to learn. But yes, I think all of it, and it doesn't give, like I always say, any of this stuff, it doesn't give us excuses as addicts, but it does give reasons. And so, I think for partners, when you're going, I don't know why he doesn't and I don't mean to just, but let's say a heterosexual couple, she, just for clarity, but if the addict, I don't understand why he doesn't get this. I don't understand and I think because their brain isn't connected. They physiologically can't until they get out of the active addiction and get some tools and skills.
Right. And so in recovery, we have to walk this fine balance between understanding that the brain is healing and that people are going to be more impulsive and the tendency to act out is going to be stronger, but we also don't want to encourage it, right? So we have to walk this fine line, not shaming people, not because it's part of the normal process, but also to kind of move them along toward recovery.
Yeah, well, and I think once you, it's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know, but once you know, now it's my responsibility. Now I know, I have a choice, and there's lots of people who call and start talking about that they want treatment, but then when push comes to shove, it's like, well, it's not that bad right now, so this part of their brain is doing all the talking, and but once they grasp, like I always say, I wish I had a magic wand that they could just see how good life can be, not rainbows and lollipops, but good, like where you feel good about yourself and you're living, like you said, with integrity. That's, I think, what we as humans really want, and to be connected and to be attached to ourselves and to others. But you get kind of stuck in the lizard brain. So.
Right.
Okay. So I thought I knew who I was, but the combination of having the experience of being an alcoholic and married to a narcissist porn addict helped me to find out who I am, time 100. So, yeah.
Yeah. And good for you, because I think you chose to pull yourself into recovery and make those awarenesses and see the things that you didn't want to see, and move forward. And that's what recovery is all about. That's the core of this freedom we're talking about too.
So and freedom, it doesn't come on day one, or like you can't go, well, when you've been doing this work for 6 months, you're it really is a process, and it continues to unfold. So she asked, is the Kim Buck podcast available now? So two things. Kim Buck's podcast is on Prodependence, is on the Sex, Love, and Addiction podcast series. So a little plug for that whole series. David has his own podcast series. You can find both of them on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. And then you can see the platforms on YouTube or iTunes or Android or Spotify or Stitcher, whatever. So that's one thing. But what I was referring to, she does a webinar. So, and she's going to do one this Friday. So the first and third Fridays of the month, she has her Prodependence webinar. And so that one was, I don't remember which one that was. That was probably a May one. So check the May ones where she was talking about that. But you know, she has helpful, useful tools. She's working on, she's collaborating with Dr. Rob on the workbook that will accompany the Prodependence, Moving Beyond Codependency book. And so she has skills that she's been using in her. She's got a large practice here in Arizona, and she's been working with partners and utilizing tools to change the lens to a prodependent lens. So she comes on twice a month and shares about that work and giving some tools and just answering questions. So all of you are invited to come to the webinar on Friday, but you can also find the previously recorded ones, as you can with David's or Dr. Rob's, or John Taylor has a series, Rock and Relationships. He on Monday, he said, I went through and laid out the whole year for his topics. And I was like, awesome. So, but he does his series is about any kind of relationship. It really is on helpful skills. You know, he talks about using it with his kids. You know, we talk about using it in the workplace, you know, whatever relationship, it's just good relationship skills. And practical things that you can go, well, I can take that and go use this, you know. So those are all opportunities for connecting. And then the drop-in groups, I'm going to give a little plug for that. There's no more questions, so feel free to pop a question in here if you'd like. But the drop-in groups, so David and I can see each other. A drop-in group, if you haven't experienced one, is an opportunity for you to join a group. It's not a 12-step, it's not therapy, but you have an opportunity if you identify as that particular group. There's partners groups, including there's a separate one for male partners. There's addict groups, including a separate one for female sex and love addicts. There's a gay man's group. There's a porn addicts group. So there's all these different opportunities to connect, and you can be anywhere in the world. And if you join via this Zoom link, you can be in this room, and you can share what's going on with you, and you can get support, and you can also give support to other people. It's really a powerful opportunity to get support when, it may be something that isn't really safe to talk about, with your family and friends, like you need to have that boundary to protect yourself and your family. So, or you just need to vent, whatever it is you need. So it's a safe place to do that. So
I'll just, if I may, because we don't have any open questions right now. The podcast that I've done is called Sex, Love, and Addiction, which is the same as Dr. Rob's podcast. But my series is Healing Conversations for Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Men. And so it really focuses on the experience in that community, both from addiction point of view, but we look at other issues, stigma and the HIV epidemic. And I talked to a young man who transitioned from female to male, and just all kinds of aspects that I think are really fascinating and helpful. So we're turning out one a week, so that you can see them on the website, and you can also get them on Stitcher or Apple or Android.
There's a link to all the different platforms on sex and relationship healing. It's a really easy way to click through it. And I've listened to several. I should have more time tomorrow and Friday because it'll be a little quieter, but they're great, David. They're really informative and thought-provoking. There's several of them. I'm going like, I'm gonna have to ask David about that because, there's just really interesting information you know, and just helpful to think about overall. So some of his are in, so I've changed the platform on sex and relationship healing to have categories. So if you're an addict, here's some that you may want to click on. If you're, I think I did couples, I think I did partners, and then LGBTQ. And so some of them will be in multiple categories. So you can find different ones. You're welcome to listen to any of them, but you know, we just thought it might be helpful. Like when you go to a library, it's kind of nice to go to a certain section so you can kind of start there. It was just, you know, to kind of make that easier. So hopefully it's useful. So.
Good. No, but this is a quiet group tonight. Feel free to jump in, everybody. When you, Tammy, earlier were talking about that primal part of the brain, how addiction sort of comes from there, and like with breathing, you know, it reminded me of how life and death it feels when you're.
Yeah.
You know, you have to. I'm going to die if I don't get a fix or get relief or act out. It's that strong, and it really is coming. The brain believes it is because it's so fused with that life and death functions that we have. So it's a dramatic and powerful force that we really have to contend with. It's really powerful.
I've been on, I've joined a couple of Facebook groups, you know, for recovery people, just because I want to, you know, it's helpful for me to keep doing recovery things. And I hear that message often. It's like, I want to use so badly right now, you know. I'm grateful that they're reaching out because that's, I think, at least the right step, you know, but you can tell the desperation in the message of like, I can't stand it, you know, and, you know, if I'm online right then, I'm, you know, I always say the best thing for me, get out of myself. You know, if I'm sitting here thinking about, you know, poor me, I just want to act out. Oh gosh, I just want to use whatever. That's a really bad place for me to be. But if I go be of service to somebody else or go do anything, you know, go to a meeting, go whatever, you know, that's the helpful thing. But that desperation, I mean, you can feel it in their messages that it's just, you know, I can't stand it. Yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah. So if anybody has their own experiences with freedom and addiction and recovery, please feel free to share, or tips, anything, any insights you have. We're welcome. This is in light of the 4th of July, we're talking about freedom tonight, and freedom and recovery from addiction. It's sort of related. This past weekend was World Pride, which is the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, and we had it in New York. I was there for a gay and sober conference. We had 500 gay men that were there, and it was a kind of amazing experience in the light of that whole thing. But I was reminded you can be in a wonderful city like New York and be surrounded by all kinds of things and just not even think about addiction. We had connection, we had healing, we had laughs and cries and celebration, and but to kind of feel all that recovery energy in this larger sense was a really spectacular moment. So again, an opportunity to feel joy and for me to not be hiding out in my living room somewhere.
Listening to Joni Mitchell. So,
yeah, exactly. You know, and you know, playing some new song. That's what I did this weekend. Yeah. So it was great. It was really good.
You know, I was thinking too, it's like if we're always acting out to numb out, we miss out on we don't have to feel the bad. We also don't get to feel the good. You know, we miss out on all that. You know, like you clearly, I mean, I saw it in your face. That was really meaningful for you. And when you're numbed out all the time, you numb out on everything.
Right. We can't selectively pick what we want to numb. That's totally true. Yeah. Yep.
So a couple of comments. My husband swears his addiction was only, in all caps, porn, and I believe him. However, there is that nagging 0.01% chance I'm wrong. I've been lied to many times and do not trust my own judgment anymore. Should I still have him take an STD test?
You don't say how long your husband has been in recovery. You know, those kind of things are difficult. I think you really need to work with a professional on that kind of stuff, because these are delicate negotiations at times that trust, in my experience, sometimes trust, of course, is one of the last things to return. I mean, it has to be hard earned to come back, and it does come back, but I think never as fast as the addict would like it to come back. And sometimes things like STD tests to verify behavior they don't always give relief of the worry. Now, I will say, I do think, I'm a sex therapist also, as STD tests are important with any addict and anyone in recovery, just to get a baseline of what's going on. So I think it's worthy of a conversation and see what happens. And it may be a conversation that needs to be facilitated by a professional to kind of help you figure out what's going on. Because when I see that, I think, yeah, there's the issue of a test, but that's related to all these other deeper issues of trust and communication. And so you have to kind of get the larger picture. But I think, it's natural for you to not be totally trusting. And that takes time. And I think time is probably the biggest factor, actually, and evidence of change in behavior. But I would, it's the kind of thing I can't say yes or no, but I think STD tests are really important for partners because stuff does come home. So to find out about that, but also in terms of just verifying behavior, I think that is a deeper conversation that needs maybe the help of someone to facilitate it for you.
Indicated that he's been in recovery for 10 months is the continuation of that. So,
okay. So that's a meaningful period of time. And I think still something that should be talked about with a professional, probably in terms of how you're going to go forward. What's the plan? What's your communication style? And to get through these patches. Because in my experience, it's not just time, although time is important, but it kind of, recovery, I think, goes in kind of phases. It gets better, it gets a little worse. It's not a linear process. It kind of, it kind of morphs in different directions sometimes. And so people really need to stay on their game and check it out. But I think it's good for you for being alert and starting to trust again. And just, I think, maybe that old expression, trust but verify, is probably not a bad idea.
And I'm going to acknowledge that there are people that are just porn addicts. There are some people that do that. But I'm going to say, do trust your own judgment. Like if you're having niggling thoughts about that, like part of addiction is that, is the gaslighting. It's going back to I'm going to protect my ability to act out at all costs. And so, you don't say, and you don't have to, all the things that he's doing in order to be in recovery from the addiction, but hopefully it's, it's positive things like 12 steps and going to a therapist and, like all the things, particularly with porn addiction, like there's a lot of people that are doing that for hours a day. And so now all of a sudden there's hours a day to replace. And then there's all the feelings that I was numbing out with, and now I don't know what to do. So that in between is really challenging. So I'm not saying, that he didn't just do porn, and I'm not saying that isn't, a betrayal to you. So please hear me clearly. But, I think David's suggestion of, working with a professional, I don't know if there was a professional, therapeutic disclosure that would be important. Like there's just a lot to be addressed. So making sure that you both have, that you're both doing things that are supportive for you. If you haven't read Out of the Doghouse yet, that's a great book on rebuilding trust. Dr. Rob wrote that just about rebuilding trust, and it gives you an opportunity. There's specific things that, if you're the partner that's been unfaithful, and even if it's only, as you say, in all caps, porn, that's still a betrayal to the relationship that you both agreed to or thought you would agree to. So it's one of those things where there are things that, are specific. Do these things, it's kind of laid out in a very step-by-step pragmatic way. But even if you've been gaslighted, there's that voice inside you that's going, So I think listen to that and get support, around that too. So
sure.
So this one says, I caught my husband seeking clickbait today on his work computer. He lied to me at first, but eventually confessed. I'm sorry. That is challenging that he continues to.
Right. Although, good for you for confronting it, and good for him for ultimately owning up to it. But that's certainly an issue that he needs to take to his sponsor and to his program and work on that, because that's a troublesome sign that we need to address. What we teach our addicts is that they're not responsible for these urges that come up. They may be walking down the street and find somebody attractive, or they may come across something on the computer by accident. That happens, but it's what they do with it at that point. And whether they act on it or not, is, we talk about the 3-second rule and reframing the person as someone's mother or daughter or whatever. But I think it's really important for the integrity of the addict to follow through with that. I mean, there's going to be things that pop up that are triggering or activating, but at that point, and it's what Tammy said earlier, we're addicts, but our responsibility is what do we do after we realize we're addicts? What responsibility do we take for our own recovery, as opposed to just kind of continuing to act out with those stimulus? So,
and unfortunately, for this particular case, he's not in recovery and does not want to face his addiction. She said she asked him why, and he said he was frustrated at work. His excuses thread is, I feel like I'm being treated like a kid, or I wasn't meant to live in a PG world. I explained that there are forms of denial and things he tells himself to make his behavior acceptable to him. I made up our spare room as my safe place and bought a bed. I told him I won't be sleeping next to him until I feel he actually understands and shows true change. And good for you for setting those important boundaries for you to keep yourself safe when he's still choosing to do things that are clearly not working for your relationship.
Absolutely. And you said something important there that's illustrative of the whole issue too. I asked him why. He said he was frustrated at work. That's that perfect example of how we as addicts take frustration or pain or boredom or what other uncomfortable emotion we're experiencing and manage it by detaching, dissociating, numbing. That's what he's doing. He was self-medicating. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem.
Yeah. And I remember early in recovery, I couldn't handle feelings, on good or bad. And somebody said, what are you feeling? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just feeling a lot and I hate it. It was so uncomfortable to have to feel, whether it was good or bad, everything felt so intense. And it was really challenging. And I couldn't name, like therapists have this chart of like the different faces and stuff like that. I basically needed that to be able to go, it's that one, or if it was a mix of emotions, which was even more challenging to, to figure it out. So, and you said, I asked him about porn and clickbait, how they benefit him. And he said it doesn't. So he's clear on one aspect that it doesn't really benefit him, but it is an escape. I'm going to go live in my non-PG world and, and numb out and escape.
Right. And good for you for the good boundaries and taking care of yourself. That's really important in this whole process.
It is. Any other comments, questions? You've got Dr. David here. I don't see your awards, but he's received lots of awards for his work in the field. So,
I have nothing within arm reach. So
I was going to say, this guy's an expert. So you have an opportunity to ask him questions.
You said something earlier about, I was thinking about the sex piece, how addicts kind of don't want to be told what to do on our way to finding freedom, right? We want to make those choices. And I think that's especially true when you get sex involved. I mean, it's one thing, drugs, alcohol, heroin, meth, it's pretty clear cut. If somebody's got a problematic use, it's pretty clear to them ultimately. They may put up a good fight, but I think when it comes to sex, and I guess I'm speaking more from the gay community's perspective, but there's been so much repression, if you will, or judgment that I think a lot of gay men say, well, you don't touch my sex. We can do anything we want because it's kind of our right, and as gay men to embrace our sexual selves, and good, so I'm sex positive, good for them. But the problem is if that behavior is addictive or self-destructive, it's a problem. And I think that's where we're not prescriptive, but the individual has to choose which behavior goes in that inner boundary, which one is not just not acceptable. And so there's a lot of resistance sometimes toward how we approach sexual recovery and what it means. And I think with chemsex that we treat, the patients really have to do both. They have to do that sexual boundary plan and then get a traditional substance recovery plan as well. So it gets complicated, and there can be resistance. But I think it's with practice and with continuity, it does become very meaningful for people.
Well, I think with chemicals, it's easy. Abstinence it's abstinence. That's sobriety. But with food or sex or any of those other things, I mean, with food, I couldn't just not eat. That it was like I had to learn to have an acceptable range of this is what it's going to look like for me. And it's, been modified along the way as, things became clearer to me. But yeah, I had to learn to have a different relationship with it. Same, with a sex addict. And each sex addict is different. It's not like, well, this is the plan for everybody. It is really nuanced. I think, when you were talking about in the gay community, I think it's true for females too. I think, the research that I've seen has been that females are having more male-like sex. So, they're the ones that are hooking up on apps, and they're the ones that are doing, it used to be that we'd wait for somebody to come and ask us to date,
buy dinner.
Yes, buy dinner. the expectation, but this was the roles, and it's really shifted. It's going to be interesting to see how that, because the other side of it that I've heard is, like men and women are different. Rob talks about, when women have sex, there's chemicals that there's an automatic connection. And so we are automatically bonding with someone. So how is this all going to play out? I think it'll be a fascinating study in, 15, 20 years or whatever to see, have women changed chemically, I guess, have we changed, or have we found that didn't really work for us and we are looking for more? I don't know. It's just interesting. So
there's been some really fascinating work on sort of differences, male and female differences, and how our brains are wired and how we relate. And when you overlay that onto society and our social trends, it's a fascinating view of what's going on, for sure. Yeah.
So this comment is, I totally understand what David said about the gay community, but I think for someone who only finds intimacy with sex, it's like asking them not to breathe or pump blood through their bodies. Right. And I guess a lot of the gay men that I see as clients who have gotten involved with chemsex or even have other intimacy issues, they've confused sex for intimacy. And I think that's the big thing and that's true, not just true for gay men, it's true for everybody. I'd say every addict, especially every sex addict, sex and intimacy become kind of split. In fact, I've had many clients, sex addict and chemsex clients, who could only have sex with people that they had no emotional connection with. The sexual object had to be way out there, and if they had an emotional feeling for someone, they could get no sexual arousal. This is total split. And what we try to do is sort of reintegrate that and help people understand that sex is a part of intimacy, but intimacy is so much more, so much deeper than just sex, and to split those two. So yeah, so I think it's a matter of teaching people how to embrace healthy sex, and sex that's not exploitative or objectifying or demeaning to themselves or somebody else, and but to really use sex as one element of expression in healthy intimacy. And that's a challenge for everybody, I think, but especially for an addict. Well, I think societal messages are that sex is intimacy. So when I talk about the Seeking Integrity Los Angeles program, I talk specifically that it's a sex addiction and intimacy disorder program, or the co-occurring sex addiction and a chemical dependency program, because I may be wrong, but I have not met a sex addict yet who doesn't have some form of intimacy disorder, like that he or she may be out there. I just don't know them, because, there's always that disconnect, and now, I mean, there's a lot of porn addicts that have never had sex, but can't have physical sex because their brain has been so hijacked by the fantasy porn, that their bodies aren't willing to have sex with, and, it just doesn't work. So,
yeah. I mean, with porn especially, and meth, they're very common. They have a lot of similarities, but they both create what we call super stimulation, meaning that it sets the bar so high to get it to be even interested in or aroused, that anything kind of normal, like a person, a partner, doesn't do it. And so that recovery is about letting the brain kind of reboot and reset that point where we start to find pleasure in what we call natural rewards. People we love, the feeling of belonging, sex with someone we love, good food, pasta, whatever. It all gives us little bursts of dopamine.
Yeah.
But in the addiction, that pasta, which I enjoy a lot, it does nothing. Being intimate with my partner, for an addict, doesn't do it, but it's a source of great joy for me. So it's a matter of kind of rewiring and reframing.
Yes, and going back to the joy in the freedom, it is those connections and being able to recognize them, like it is, like to be able to take that pause, like you smiled when you talked about that, both being intimate with your partner and eating pasta, both of those made you smile,
Which one had the bigger smile?
I'm not going to say, so.
It's recorded. I'll have to go back and check the tape.
There you go. Yeah, but I'm just saying, to be able to recognize that those are meaningful in your life, not just like, I got to go, I got to go act out. I got to go get another drink. I got to whatever, and all, it really is a freedom to be able to not have to, I mean, it was, like you said it too, it's exhausting. My husband is not an addict. Now, this is kind of funny. So he started brewing beer, and I found myself getting caught up in the, like, well, are you, like the season's going to change. You need to do this because like the temperature's going to change and then you're not going to be like, and I'm like, wait, this is not my beer. This is not my thing. This is not my thing, but my little brain is going, like, well, you should plan ahead because you're going to run out and that would be tragic, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, who cares? He doesn't care, So like, but like after all these years, I still have to go, that was like it's a fairly short thought, but it's like, it's off to the races really fast yet. So crazy.
That's such a great point. And I thank you for saying it because, we both have been doing this a long time, the bulk of our lives and in recovery, and those thoughts still happen. And what a great lesson that is because I think in early recovery, I had these sort of magical thinking about what it was going to be like. And I still often get sort of addictive thoughts, not often, but they happen. But I just know I go right to plan B. I mean, I don't even entertain them now. Just like, oh yeah, that's that. Let's go over here. And but I think it's an important note for people to realize that those stuff they pop up, and we need to learn how to manage them.
Yes, and it's not a failure of my recovery that I have the thought.
Yes.
It's what I do with the thought. And they, like I said, as fast as I was talking, the thought is faster, it's like, I can think through and go, yeah, right. I mean, it just is so,
Exactly.
It's like one of those, oh, there's that silly addiction, it's,
Exactly. Yeah.
But like somebody was talking about that they still think that they can control this and you can control their addiction. And I said, I know for sure I cannot control my addiction. And if I ever, I know it can turn around and bite me really quick. And so I think having that healthy respect of, I know it's there, I acknowledge it, I'm doing what I can. I say I do all the things I do so that I have an insurance policy so that when something happens, I've got the wherewithal, I've got the resources, I've got the support so that I can not have to go act out. But I never think, oh, I've got that, I've got that in the bag. I've got that licked.
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah, healthy respect for that. And, and to bring it back to what we've been talking about tonight with freedom, that you take all those things, and I think a lot of people look at it as kind of oppressive to have to give up this or go to meetings or do what we need to do to keep our recovery going. But out of that comes this tremendous choice and freedom to live fully, and I think it's a huge gift.
And I see my friends at a meeting, or I see people that I come on here. I've only been on yours a couple of times now, but I go, oh, I see people that, that I see on some of the other meetings. I mean, it makes me smile. So it's good.
Right.
So there's a comment. I think sexual freedom for women is that we have been shamed for having sexual desire. And when a woman breaks away from that shame, it's not as much about it as comparing to a man, but embracing part that's been oppressed.
I mean, I agree. I think there's so much sexual oppression in our society for many different groups and genders. And so it's a struggle. And I think, so to break out of that shame, certainly no good comes of shame. Shame is a dead end. And it serves no purpose except to just keep us chained in one uncomfortable place. So I think, anybody that can break free of it and embrace themselves with love and compassion, I think that's kind of in one of the sort of sub messages tonight from both Cam and me is this: we really have to embrace ourselves with compassion and take responsibility, but also be gentle with ourselves and with people around us. And while we're going through this, because it's a process. But part of recovery is really, to me, about breaking out of shame. And for me, shame was it. That was my life, was this ball of shame. And so I really respect anybody that kind of breaks free of that and embraces themselves. Yeah.
And Kristen Snowden did a really good webinar on the difference between shame and humiliation and all of that. I mean, their guilt, all of that. It was a really good one. So there's lots of really good stuff. Do you get that hint that there's really good stuff? There's great contributors like Dr. David Fawcett, on this site. And, we're here for you to have these resources for free so that you can, hopefully find support and, and it will add value to your day. So.
For sure.
So we're out of time. So thank you all for attending tonight. We really appreciate it. And David, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is fun. It's really nice to see you there. Yeah.
So until next week, everybody. And there's lots of other stuff. So join other ones. Bye-bye.
Good night.